If you're tuning in for this Black History Month series, From Africa to America, the story of Black resilience, thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us out a lot with the algorithm. This is part 3 of 28. The Middle Passage ended when the ships reached the shore, but for the survivors, the next chapter was just beginning. The ocean had taken them from their homeland. The land would now attempt to take their identity, their family, and their future. The auction block was the center of this new reality. A place where human beings were treated as property, where families were torn apart, and where the system of slavery revealed its full structure. It was not hidden. It was not a secret. It was public, organized, and normalized by the society that built its wealth on the bodies of the enslaved. This is the story of the auction block. The moment when people who had lived full lives were forced into a system that saw them only as labor. In the Americas, the sale of enslaved people was not a rare event. It was a business, a marketplace, a public transaction. Auction sites were often located in town squares, ports, courthouses, warehouses, plantation yards. These were places where people gathered to buy and sell goods, and where human beings were included among those goods. The auction block was not an accident of history. It was a deliberate structure built to support the plantation economy. Before the auction, enslaved people were prepared in ways meant to increase their value in the eyes of buyers. The goal was to present them as strong, capable, and profitable. This preparation was not about dignity. It was about profit. People were inspected, evaluated, categorized, assigned prices buyers looked for: age, strength, health, skills, perceived obedience. Families were not evaluated as units. Individuals were assessed as separate commodities. This process stripped away the humanity of the enslaved and reduced them to economic assets. When the auction began, people were brought onto a raised platform, the auction block. This was a place where strangers examined them. Bids were shouted, prices were negotiated, futures were decided in moments. The auction block was a stage where the system of slavery displayed its power openly. It was not hidden behind closed doors. It was part of everyday life in many towns and cities. Children watched, merchants watched, officials watched, buyers watched. The auction block was a reminder that the system was accepted, normalized, and woven into the fabric of society. One of the most devastating aspects of the auction block was the separation of families. People who had survived the Middle Passage together were often torn apart. Mothers were separated from children, husbands from wives, siblings from one another, friends from friends. These separations were not accidents. They were part of the system. Buyers purchased individuals based on labor needs, age, gender, skill, price. Family bonds were not considered. Profit was the priority. The auction block became a place where the deepest human connections were severed in moments. The sale of enslaved people was one of the most profitable industries in the Americas. It fueled plantation growth, agricultural expansion, economic development, political power. The auction block was the engine that kept this system running. It supplied labor to sugar plantations, cotton fields, rice fields, tobacco farms, domestic households, mines, workshops. The wealth of entire regions depended on the buying and selling of human beings. This economic reality made the system difficult to challenge. Too many people benefited from it. Too many institutions depended on it. Too many laws protected it. The auction block was not just a place of sale, it was the foundation of an entire economic order. For the enslaved, the auction block was a moment of profound trauma. It represented the loss of control, the loss of family, the loss of identity, the loss of future people were forced to stand before strangers who judged their worth based on physical appearance and perceived labor potential. The psychological impact was immense: fear, humiliation, uncertainty, grief, despair. But even in this moment, people found ways to endure: quiet prayers, shared glances, whispered words, internal strength, hope for survival. The human spirit persisted even in the face of overwhelming oppression. Once purchased, the enslaved were taken to their new locations. This marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by forced labor, strict control, and the struggle to maintain humanity in a system designed to erase it. The auction block was not the end of the journey. It was the transition point between the Middle Passage and life on the plantation. It was the moment when the system of slavery revealed its full structure: economic, social, legal, political. The auction block was the heart of this system. The selling of human beings was one of the most devastating aspects of the transatlantic slave trade. It was a public display of a system built on exploitation, profit, and the denial of humanity. But even in this moment of suffering, the enslaved carried fragments of identity, culture, and resilience that would survive across generations. The auction block was a place of loss, but it was also the beginning of a story of endurance, strength, and transformation. This is the story of the selling of human beings, the moment when the system of slavery revealed its true nature. Family is the first foundation of human life. It is where identity is formed, where love is learned, where protection is found, and where culture is passed from one generation to the next. For the millions of Africans brought to the Americas, family was not just a source of strength. It was a lifeline. It was the last remaining connection to a world that had been violently taken from them. But the system of slavery in the Americas was built on the destruction of that lifeline. It was built on breaking families apart, controlling relationships, and reshaping human bonds into economic calculations. This is the story of how the institution of slavery targeted the most sacred human connection, the family, and how, even in the face of that destruction, people found ways to hold on to love, identity, and hope. When enslaved people arrived in the Americas, they were not treated as families. They were treated as individuals, units of labor, valued only for their ability to work, obey, and produce. At the auction block, mothers were separated from children, husbands from wives, siblings from one another, elders from the young. These separations were not rare. They were not exceptions. They were part of the system. Enslavers bought people based on age, strength, skill, gender, price. Family bonds were not considered. Profit was the priority. This systematic separation created generational trauma that would echo for centuries. To understand why families were torn apart, we must understand the economic structure of slavery. Enslaved people were considered property, assets, investments, sources of labor. Children born into slavery were also considered property from birth. This meant that enslavers had a financial incentive to control relationships, reproduction, family structures. The destruction of families was not just cruelty. It was part of the economic model. One of the most dehumanizing aspects of slavery was the system of forced reproduction, often referred to in historical scholarship as breeding practices. This system was not about relationships. It was not about family. It was about increasing the enslaver's labor force. Enslaved men and women were often pressured, coerced, manipulated, forced into reproductive pairings chosen by enslavers. The goal was simple: more children meant more future laborers. This system denied bodily autonomy, disrupted natural relationships, treated people as livestock, turned reproduction into an economic strategy. It was one of the clearest examples of how slavery attempted to strip away humanity and reduce people to property. And yet, even within this system, enslaved people found ways to form real bonds, protect one another, and resist the complete erasure of their dignity. The breaking of families created deep emotional wounds. For parents, the fear of losing a child, the grief of separation, the helplessness of being unable to protect their family. For children, the trauma of being taken from their parents, the confusion of being placed with strangers, the loss of identity and security. For partners, the pain of forced separation, the uncertainty of never knowing what happened to loved ones, the struggle to rebuild emotional connections. These wounds did not heal quickly. They shaped generations. Despite the system's attempts to destroy family bonds, enslaved people found ways to rebuild them. They created chosen families, community networks, surrogate parents, protective elders, sibling-like bonds. These relationships were acts of resistance. They were ways of reclaiming humanity in a system designed to erase it. A child separated from their mother might be raised by another woman in the community. A man separated from his wife might form a new bond with someone who had also lost family. Elders became teachers, storytellers, and protectors. These chosen families kept culture alive. They kept hope alive. They kept their identity alive. Spirituality became a source of strength for many enslaved people, whether through African traditions, blended practices, new forms of worship, songs, prayers, stories. People found ways to cope with the trauma of family separation. Spiritual gatherings became places where grief was shared, hope was nurtured, community was strengthened, identity was preserved. These practices helped people survive the emotional devastation of family destruction. The destruction of families during slavery had long-lasting effects. It shaped family structures, cultural traditions, community networks, survival strategies, emotional resilience, but it also created generational trauma, disrupted lineages, lost histories, fragmented identities. Despite this, African American families rebuilt themselves again and again. They created new traditions, new bonds, and new forms of strength. The resilience of Black families is one of the most powerful legacies of this history. The destruction of families was one of the most devastating aspects of slavery. It was a deliberate system designed to break human bonds, control reproduction, and reshape identity. But even in the face of this destruction, enslaved people found ways to love, protect, nurture, and rebuild. They created chosen families, preserved culture, and passed down resilience through generations. The story of African American families is not just a story of loss. It is a story of survival, a story of strength, a story of unbreakable human connection. This is the story of the destruction of families and the resilience that refused to die.